The papers speak of him only in fragments. The ruins are silent, yet the handprints remain. In the ledgers his name appears, then vanishes, as though erased by trembling hands. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. In the annals of Arkansas history, the year 1857 holds a darker shadow than most would readily confess. Little Rock, still half-formed in its identity, was at once a bustling frontier town and a site of quiet, unspoken atrocities. Among the tangle of plantations that skirted its outer fields stood the Holloway estate, an enterprise of cotton and timber, whose fortunes had risen swiftly on the back of merciless discipline. The Holloways were not a family remarkable in blood or pedigree. Rather, they were a type planter gentry who borrowed heavily, lived excessively, and sought to command respect through cruelty where genuine stature faltered. It was in this household that the figure later called the Bone Breaker first appeared in record, though under a different designation entirely. Court papers preserved in a weathered box at the Pulaski County Archive refer to him as Elias, aged approximately 24, sold from Louisiana stock in 1852. Strong chest, sound teeth, scars upon the wrists and shoulders. Nothing in those notations suggests a man destined to overturn his master's world, yet the silences between words conceal far more than the ledgers admit. By November of 1857, Elias had acquired a reputation both feared and whispered among the enslaved. A woman named Dinah, interviewed decades later by a WPA field worker, recalled him with hushed awe. He walked heavy, like the earth carried him harder than it carried other men. His eyes, they ain't never looked at you long, but if they did, you knew he seen straight through. Such recollections, elliptical though they are, present Elias as something more than a laborer. There was, even then, a strange intensity about him, an air that unsettled both those who owned him and those forced to toil beside him. Thanksgiving of that year was meant to be a display of Holloway prosperity. Records show that 25 guests were invited, among them planters from neighboring counties, a Methodist minister and 2 physicians. The feast was planned with extravagant care, its centerpiece a roast turkey of unusual size. Wine was brought from New Orleans, brandy from Kentucky. Yet in the spaces between this shallow revelry lay the routine degradation of human beings. For Elias and others were made to prepare the feast, while fasting themselves, permitted neither taste nor pause. The official record of what followed survives in conflicting accounts. A coroner's inquest from November 27, 1857 states tersely, deceased, Jonathan Holloway, cause fracture of cervical vertebrae inflicted by assailant named Elias, property of said deceased, death instantaneous. The clinical phrasing obscures the brutality. Witnesses described how Elias, summoned into the dining hall for display before the assembled company, was mocked by Holloway for the thickness of his hands. Laughter followed, then silence. Some swear that Holloway, emboldened by drink, ordered Elias to demonstrate his strength upon a frozen beam brought in from the yard. When Elias hesitated, Holloway struck him across the face with a brass-handled cane. What occurred next has been repeated in whispers for over a century. Elias seized his master not with hesitation, but with a swiftness that startled all present. With a single motion too fast perhaps for the mind to register, the planter's neck was broken, the sound described as like green wood snapping beneath an axe. The horror of the moment cannot be overstated. Guests fled the table, servants screamed, children hid beneath the linen. Yet Elias, according to the testimony of a terrified cousin, did not pursue or threaten further. He stood over the body, breathing heavy, his face expressionless. Some claim he spoke, though the words differ by teller. One insists he said, "Now the chains know my hand." Another records only silence, broken by the sobs of Mrs. Holloway. After this, the trail of evidence grows murky. Elias did not flee immediately. Rather, he walked from the hall into the night air, leaving footprints in the soft earth by the carriage house. These prints, it was said, were deeper than any man's ought to be. Within the hour, riders were dispatched to rouse the county militia. Pauses formed. Bloodhounds were loosed. But by dawn, Elias had vanished as though the land itself had swallowed him whole. The press of the day reported the killing in sparse, euphemistic language. The Arkansas Gazette, November 30th issue, headlined, "Unfortunate Occurrence on the Holloway Plantation." The text described Holloway's untimely demise but did not elaborate on the method. Rumor outpaced among the enslaved. The event spread like wildfire, told and retold as proof that the oppressors were not untouchable. Among the planters, it became a subject of dread, whispered in parlor corners, fear that the same strength might dwell hidden in others. Yet the most chilling detail emerges not from newspaper or court file, but from a physician's private journal discovered in Nathaniel Pruitt, one of the guests at the dinner, wrote the following in a letter to his brother: I have seen dissections and calamities aplenty, yet never a sight as I beheld on that night. The Negro Elias possessed strength not of ordinary nature. It was no mere assault, but as if the very ligaments of man were as twined before him. I confess with trembling that something unnatural resided in his frame, for the force applied exceeded the mechanics of common flesh. Such words, though dismissed by later historians as the ravings of a frightened witness, cannot be ignored. They suggest that Elias was regarded, even in his own time, not merely as a fugitive killer, but as a phenomenon beyond simple explanation. By the first week of December, Pazes claimed to have sighted him near the swamps south of the city. Tracks were followed, dogs sent baying, yet always the trail ended without capture. The Holloway family, ruined by Jonathan's death and mounting debts, petitioned the legislature for compensation but received little. Their name faded into obscurity. Elias meanwhile entered the darker current of oral tradition. Children of the Delta were warned not to wander after dusk, lest the bone-breaker find them. Old songs hummed in the quarters told of a man who bent iron gates with his hands and vanished into the pine woods without sound. Some said he was taken in by maroons hidden deep in the river bottom. Others believed he crossed northward, aided by those who saw in him a figure of liberation. But a smaller, quieter number whispered that he remained near, haunting the very earth where his strength had first revealed itself. In 1834, 23 years earlier, medical texts had already begun speculating on the peculiar giant stock emerging in certain southern bloodlines, noting unusual density of bone and thickness of muscle. Elias's name, though not cited, seems to have become retrospectively linked to these discussions, whether through heredity, environment, or something less easily named. His body defied easy categorization, and so his story, preserved in fragments, assumes the shape not of a man alone, but of a question that history has never resolved. We begin here then, with that November night, a dinner table overturned, a master struck down, a man vanishing into darkness. What followed was not only the desperate hunt for a fugitive, but the slow unearthing of a lineage and a practice more disturbing than any single act of violence. This is the story of Elias Holloway's property no longer, but Elias the bone-breaker of Little Rock. The Holloway plantation fell quiet after that night, the shutters drawn, the fields neglected, the workers restless but fearful. The planter's corpse was lowered into the ground behind the family chapel, though no minister would bless the grave. Miss Holloway, overcome by grief and scandal, retreated into silence. The household that had once strutted with hollow grandeur became an empty shell. Yet silence never endures. It was broken first by the reports of Elias's flight. Militia logs from November 29, 1857, describe mounted searches along the Arkansas River, hounds straining against their leashes, armed men cursing the marshland that swallowed tracks as soon as they were made. A sergeant named Alcott noted, "Beast runs as though the devil himself carried him. Dogs bay then whine, refusing to follow. No prints remain after 100 paces. It is as though the ground rejects his passage." Rumor rippled faster than fact. Some said Elias leapt fences 12 feet high. Others whispered he waded through rivers in flood without fault. By the first week of December, the bone-breaker was no longer a fugitive man. He was already becoming legend, and yet scraps of record prove he was still flesh and blood. A stable boy named Reuben, interviewed in 1871, claimed Elias appeared at his uncle's barn near Fort Chi. He asked for water, nothing more. His hands were bound with rags, blood seeping through where the cane had cut him days before. Reuben recalled, "He was quiet, mighty quiet, not like a beast, not like the stories, just tired." And his eyes never left the door. But Pruitt, the physician who had witnessed Holloway's death, was not satisfied with the notion of Elias as ordinary. His journal entries became obsessive in the days that followed, filling page after page with anatomical sketches and speculative notes. "The tensile power of his grip," he wrote, "surpasses what one might attribute even to the thickest musculature. The articulation of his scapula and clavicle, if I observed correctly, allowed for leverage exceeding natural proportion. Might such strength be or is it wrought by some hidden art?" It was here, perhaps, that the darker current of the Holloway estate began to surface, for when the archives are read closely, one finds hints that Jonathan Holloway himself had been dabbling in what he termed improvement. Among the planter's papers, recovered when creditors seized the estate, was a small ledger written in cipher. When translated, it revealed chilling notations, names of enslaved men and women, paired with crude descriptions of height, weight, and physical peculiarity. Terms such as stock, issue, yield, were used without hesitation. Holloway was not merely a cruel master, he was conducting a grotesque program of selective breeding, attempting to cultivate bodies of greater size and endurance for labor, and perhaps for sale at inflated price. The Holloways were not unique in this. Other plantations across the South bore whispered reputations for similar practices, though few left written proof. But in this ledger lies the first documented suggestion that Elias may have been the product of such a scheme. He is listed under the year 1833, the note reading simply, "Male of uncommon stature, issue of B&L, to be watched. B&L, 2 women's initials, no further detail." The cold reduction of human lives to initials and issue suggests how deeply the Holloways viewed flesh as stock, to be altered at will. If Elias was indeed the result of generations of such design, it is no wonder his strength unnerved all who witnessed it. He was not supernatural. He was not divine. He was the consequence of human ambition twisted into cruelty, a body shaped by the arrogance of men who believed they could cultivate muscle as they cultivated cotton. But records show that even after Jonathan's death, others were eager to study what he had left behind. In January 1858, Dr. Pruitt petitioned the county court for access to the Holloway estate, citing his interest in recovering materials of scientific value. He was granted temporary oversight, as Mrs. Holloway had withdrawn, and creditors were squabbling over assets. In the cellar of the carriage house, Pruitt discovered crates filled with bones, animal at first glance, but on closer inspection disturbingly human. Some bore marks of measurement, others had been sawn polished, labeled with initials corresponding to names in the cipher ledger. His journal again, the femur of subject C, exceeds average Negro length by 3/4 inches, density remarkable. The mandible of subject R shows prognathism uncommon in Caucasian stock. Is Holloway's ledger not merely commerce, but experiment? Pruitt's handwriting grows erratic. He sketches spines, rib cages, skulls elongated or broadened beyond typical range. He muses on adaptations for burden and augmentations of grip. His obsession transformed into something uncomfortably close to admiration. Meanwhile, the search for Elias continued, though reports grew stranger with each week. Farmers claimed their oxen were found slain, their necks twisted as if by a giant hand. Hunters swore to glimpses of a towering figure, moving silently through the pine. In one chilling affidavit, a deputy reported finding handprints pressed into the clay of a riverbank, so deep they held water after rain. Was Elias truly there, leaving marks of pursuit, or had panic and myth already fused until men saw what they feared? What is certain is this: by spring of 1858, no posse had captured him. The Holloway estate lay in ruin. Pruitt, discredited by fellow physicians who dismissed his journals as fantasies, withdrew into private study. And yet among the enslaved of Pulaski County, the bone breaker became more than a man. He was a figure of resistance. Dinah, the same woman who had once described his heavy step, recalled decades later, "We never said his name out loud, just bone break." That way the whites couldn't tell if we talked of a man or a spirit, but to us he was proof a master could fall, and a chain could snap. The academic mind seeks explanation, measurements, heredity, records, but the human heart clings to symbol. Elias was flesh shaped by a planter's cruelty, and spirit lifted by an enslaved people's desperate hope. And yet the ledger remains, its initials, its measurements, its quiet, damning proof that what occurred at Holloway's feast was not spontaneous, but the eruption of a long cultivation. The bone breaker was born of design, and in that design lies the true horror. Not that a man killed his master, but that men believed they could breed strength as they bred horses, then were shocked when it rose against them. As spring turned to summer, the question became unavoidable. If Elias was but one result, how many others had been marked in those ledgers, raised in silence, waiting in shadow? By the summer of 1858, the Holloway estate stood as a husk. Weeds choked the fields, shutters rattled loose, the chapel bell rusted on its beam. Creditors carved away the land in parcels, and with each sale fragments of the house's history vanished into attics and courthouses. Yet a few pieces, ledgers, letters and bone remained, enough to trace the shape of what had been wrought there. It was the physician Dr. Nathaniel Pruitt who clung most fiercely to those fragments. His journals, discovered decades later in the attic of his descendants, show a mind sliding between clinical observation and something nearer to compulsion. In July of that year, he recorded a visit to the estate cellar once more, where he catalogued remains still lying in crates. He wrote, "I have examined the tibiae of subjects marked D and K. Cortical thickness exceeds expectation. These bones, when struck with a hammer, emit a resonance unlike common human structure, more akin to the density of ox." Holloway's intent is no longer conjecture. He endeavored toward a race of greater endurance, bodies forged for unending toil. The words grow darker with each page. By August, Pruitt begins sketching diagrams not only of bones, but of imagined musculature layered upon them, fantasies of physique, grotesque in proportion, each labeled with hypothetical traits: unbreakable spine, hands of iron, grip to bend bars. But while Pruitt scribbled in his private books, the county continued to hunt Elias. Reports from that summer suggest sightings along the river, yet each ended the same way: dogs refusing the scent, men unnerved, trails dissolving into nothing. A farmer swore Elias strode across his pasture at dusk, driving off cattle with nothing but a glare. A ferryman claimed to see him wading midstream, the current thrashing about his waist yet failing to move him. Of course, many such accounts are exaggerations born of fear, and yet there are consistencies. Always the size, the silence, the uncanny stillness of his gaze, always the sense of strength beyond the ordinary. One detail, however, was preserved in the sworn testimony of a sheriff's deputy named Wallace. Pursuing rumors south of the city, Wallace claimed he came upon a clearing where saplings had been twisted at the base, bent into grotesque arcs, not cut nor broken but wrenched by hand. He wrote, "These trees were living, green, supple. To bend them so would require power beyond measure. I know not whether man or fiend did this, but I shall not return to that place." Such testimony might be dismissed were it not for Pruitt's simultaneous entry describing the very same phenomenon. He had, through anonymous informants, heard of trees contorted as though in giant's grip. For him, this was confirmation. "Elias remains near," he scrawled, "and with each day his body displays adaptation not unlike acceleration of breeding itself. What Holloway began in ledger, Elias perfects in flesh." This suggestion that Elias was not static but evolving haunted Pruitt. He began corresponding with colleagues in New Orleans, sending cautious inquiries about cases of unusual human development. Few replied. Those who did dismissed him as fanciful. But one letter survives, from a physician named Dr. Leclerc, who cryptically remarked, "Your description resembles reports from the islands, where certain stocks, by long mixing and selection, produce men of formidable stature. Yet you err, friend, if you imagine nature can be bent at will without consequence." It was that word consequence that seemed to burrow deepest into Pruitt's mind. He began to suspect that Holloway's program, however monstrous, had not ended with Jonathan's death. The ledger listed more initials, more issue marked for watching. If Elias was one, might there not be others scattered across neighboring plantations? This suspicion was fed by testimony from former Holloway slaves, pieced together years later. One man, Old Moses, claimed Jonathan kept special children apart from the rest, fed heavier rations, forced to haul stones as play. Another woman whispered of infants measured with calipers before they could walk, their mothers weeping as numbers were jotted into the planter's black book. The implications are dreadful. Elias may not have been singular, he may have been simply the first to reveal what was long cultivated. Meanwhile, the legend among the enslaved grew richer. Elias was no longer merely bone breaker, but the hand of deliverance. They told stories of him striking down bloodhounds with a single swing, of him bending iron traps until they snapped, of him walking at night with spirits that cloaked him from capture. Each tale exaggerated, yes, but each carrying a kernel, the vision of a man who defied bondage. And yet, as with all legends, a countercurrent formed. Among the planters, Elias was whispered of as curse, as punishment for trespassing upon nature's order. Some insisted he was not man at all but revenant, risen from bones Holloway had desecrated. Others feared that what he carried in his bloodline could spread, that strength once bred could not be unbred. By autumn of 1858, the tension was unbearable. Mrs. Holloway, isolated and crumbling, filed a petition to sell the remainder of the estate. In her deposition, she remarked, "I hear him still. At night the floorboards bend as if under weight. He is gone, yet he lingers." Scholars debate whether this was delusion or confession. The sale brought outsiders to survey the house. One, a clerk from Little Rock, later recounted in a letter that he found beneath a floorboard a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, strands of hair, thick and coarse, tied with ribbon. On the bundle, a single word inked in Jonathan Holloway's hand. It is difficult to read this and not shudder, for in that moment the Holloway's cruelty becomes personal, tactile. Hair taken from a child, preserved as sample, labeled as less than human. Pruitt, upon hearing of the find, begged to examine. He wrote, "The follicle diameter exceeds ordinary range. Density remarkable. If the stock was bred thus, it is proof of Holloway's designs. Again the slide into obsession. He could not see the horror for the fascination. But what of Elias himself? The record grows thinner here. By the end of 1858, reports of sightings dwindled. Either he had fled farther than the county's reach, or he had perished in swamp or forest. Body never found. Yet the absence of a corpse gave the legend endless life. Into the 1860s, children of the quarters still whispered his name. Soldiers encamped during the war claimed to glimpse him in the trees. Even after emancipation, elders warned their kin not to linger near the Holloway ruins, for the bone breaker walked still, neither holy man nor Holy Spirit, but something in between. Pruitt did not let the matter rest. In his final 1858 entry, he writes with a mixture of awe and dread, "I fear Holloway's work was but a beginning. Elias is not anomaly, but herald. What has been bred once may be bred again, and what flesh has learned to break bones so swiftly will not soon forget the lesson." Thus the stage was set for what came after. The deeper investigations, the records hidden, the uneasy knowledge that the bone breaker was less a myth than a mirror, showing us what cruelty, calculation and ambition can summon forth when men seek to master bodies as they master beasts. The year closed, the Holloway name dissolved, and yet the shadow lingered. For shadows do not require bodies, they thrive on silence, on the things half told. And in Pulaski County the silence about Elias was louder than words. The winter of 1858 brought not relief but a tightening of silence across Pulaski County. Newspapers ceased printing mention of Elias altogether, as though the matter had been closed by omission. Officials, pressed by creditors and Washington inquiries, insisted no giant fugitive prowled the wilderness, and yet behind shuttered doors, letters carried different tones, fearful, strained, often coded. Among the most chilling documents is a memorandum from Sheriff Alden Reese, dated January 4, 1859, addressed to the governor himself. "Your Excellency, I report in confidence that the disturbances continue. Stockyards near the river find their gates twisted, not open. Iron bands upon a storehouse door were found bent outward as though by immense force. No footprints linger, yet horses neigh and refuse the grounds. I ask guidance, for my deputies will not patrol after dusk, claiming they hear steps pacing beside them though none are seen." This was no idle fancy. Reese enclosed sketches of the twisted ironwork, crude yet convincing. Later, when these artifacts were discovered in county storage, they matched his drawings precisely. Hinges bent into spirals, locks warped as if clay. Meanwhile the Holloway estate, though sold piecemeal, remained a source of dread. Farmers leasing its outer fields reported hearing a great weight moving in the old carriage house at night. One man swore he saw fresh handprints pressed into the rotting beams, as if something tested its strength upon the wood. These impressions, he insisted, grew deeper each time he looked, the grain sinking inward rather than rebounding. It was about this time that whispers of an organized effort began to circulate. At first stories spoke only of Elias as solitary wraith, but now came accounts of other figures, freed slaves vanishing not into random woods but following marked paths north, leaving behind shackles twisted apart. The name "the Freedom Chain" appears in a freedman's letter preserved in the African Methodist archives of Memphis. He wrote in February 1859, "There are brethren who move with knowledge. They say a man walks before them taller than any two, who clears the road and bends bars like straw. He teaches silence and shows the way to water. They call themselves chain, for each hand grasps another till all are carried free." Whether this was allegory or fact is debated, yet it matches the pattern uncovered by Dr. Pruitt in his ever-growing web of notes. He became convinced that Elias was no longer fugitive but commander, orchestrating escapes, guiding others with knowledge of Holloway's records. In a February entry, Pruitt writes with mounting alarm, "This is not happenstance. The subjects operate as a body, directed by unseen intelligence. Could it be that Elias himself coordinates them, his faculties sharpened beyond common measure? If so, he is more dangerous than beast. He is strategist." At this stage one perceives Pruitt's descent. His words begin to echo both admiration and dread. He describes Elias as paragon and aberration in the same breath. At times he fantasizes about capturing him, studying his tissues, charting his capacities. At others, he speaks of Elias as harbinger of doom, a nemesis bred from the very marrow of bondage. The government, too, began to take notice. Surviving War Department notes, heavily redacted, suggest that officials feared the matter might spread beyond Arkansas. In March 1859, an internal report warned, if intelligence is correct, enhanced stock has escaped into neighboring states. Sightings suggest not merely survival but organized sabotage, documents destroyed, facilities emptied. This cannot be treated as mere runaway matter. It represents a breach of national security. That term, national security, rarely appeared in antebellum correspondence, yet here it was, tethered not to foreign armies but to men once enslaved, now altered and uncontainable. Around the same time a new name entered the record. See plantation ledgers in southern Arkansas list a male slave of unusual strength, acquired from Louisiana, who vanished in April with 2 companions. Witnesses swore these men broke their shackles by hand, moving in eerie unison. Local rumor immediately linked them to Elias. If true, it meant he was no longer alone but surrounded by equals. And then came the incident at Camden. On April 12th, a cotton magnate's storehouses were found emptied. Not looted, emptied. Every bale, every ledger, every chain used to bind men gone. The overseer reported that the locks had been not cut, but shredded, as though uncoiled by enormous fingers. He insisted he heard voices chanting low in the night, not English, but some deeper tongue that reverberated across the field. When militia arrived, they found nothing but marks in the earth, deep impressions as though vast weights had passed in silence. The incident panicked local planters, who petitioned for state protection. Yet militia patrols yielded nothing. Dogs barked, men deserted, and so the fear grew. Meanwhile Pruitt, untethered from reason, began drafting what he called his Anatomy of the Future Race. This grotesque manuscript, recovered long after, blends pseudo-scientific speculation with visionary. He sketches torsos broader than doors, arms like columns, skulls reshaped for expanded memory. Alongside these notes scrawled, superior beings, lords of the coming age, we are but scaffolds they shall discard. It is difficult to know whether Pruitt dreaded or longed for this vision, perhaps both. His language teeters between prophetic awe and shrill warning. At times he even prays to Elias directly, calling him deliverer and destroyer. Yet even as fear mounted, the enslaved carried a different interpretation. Oral histories collected after emancipation speak of Elias as redeemer. One elder recalled, "We heard he snapped master's neck and we prayed another would come to snap them all. We didn't fear him. We feared they would catch him and make us watch." Such testimonies reveal the duality of his legend. Terror to the masters, hope to the bound. By May of 1859, events spiraled further. In Tennessee, a hidden military research site was attacked by unknown assailants. Survivors described the raiders as unnaturally strong, silent, methodical, not killers. They spared lives but they obliterated records, shattered restraints, freed every subject. On the wall, carved deep, they left a single sign: broken shackles. The echo of those words, "The chains are broken," resonated across clandestine correspondence. To some, it was declaration of war. To others, prophecy fulfilled. It was in the wake of this that the name Bonebreaker reappeared in Southern papers, though cautiously veiled as rumor. One article in the Memphis Appeal of June 1859 referred cryptically to the giant hand moving across the land, undoing bondage where it pleased. Editors, pressured by authorities, soon recalled the piece, but not before copies circulated. The final blow to silence came in Washington. Congressman Joshua Giddings, stalwart opponent of slavery, received an anonymous parcel of documents, exposing the enhancement program in lurid detail. Among them, a roster of over 300 names marked as captured, escaped or terminated, and at the top, with notation of highest enhancement level, was Elias alive, uncontained, unresolved. How these papers reached Giddings remains unknown. Some speculate sympathizers within the Freedom Chain, others whisper Elias himself delivered them, walking unseen into the Capitol's very heart. Whatever the truth, the effect was explosive. Debates raged in hidden committees. Some sought to bury the evidence. Others feared foreign powers might seize upon it. But to the public nothing was revealed. The matter was sealed, files locked, tongues silenced. And yet, silence cannot bind myth. That summer, in slave quarters from Arkansas to Virginia, tales spread faster than chains could restrain, of Elias the Bonebreaker, who snapped master's neck like reed, who led the chained into wilderness, who struck fear into the hearts of all who held whips.
The legend had grown beyond him now. Whether he lived or perished, his shadow marched on.
By the summer of 1859, the whispers had become a storm too loud to suppress. What began as scattered plantation rumors now surfaced within the halls of power, forcing men who prided themselves on order and discretion to confront a specter they could neither cage nor ignore. The congressional hearings that followed were among the most extraordinary episodes in that uneasy decade, a moment when private terrors were dragged unwillingly into public light. The hearings were called not upon the strength of abolitionist rhetoric alone, but because Congressman Joshua Giddings of Ohio received the incriminating parcel, a stack of letters, ledgers, and anatomical drawings exposing the true breadth of the so-called enhancement protocol. Their ink still bore the scent of secrecy. Their words carried the stench of moral rot. To his colleagues he declared, voice quivering with indignation, "Gentlemen, we face not merely the barbarity of slavery, but its refinement into industry, a commerce of flesh engineered for greater yield. Shall we sit silent while men of science conspire with men of profit to create a new race bred for chains?" The chamber erupted. Southern representatives howled that Giddings defamed their institutions. Northern men, stunned into brief silence, soon demanded inquiry. By April 1859, a select committee had formed, its mandate cloaked in euphemism, to investigate the conditions of certain experimental practices upon agricultural laborers. Those who knew understood the words concealed horror. The first hearings convened on April 21st within the Capitol itself. Crowds gathered, drawn by rumor that something unprecedented was to be unveiled. What they received exceeded even lurid expectation. Marcus Klein, a German émigré long in the employ of Holloway's Circle, appeared under subpoena. His spectacles flashed in the chamber's gaslight. His accent thickened with emotion. He began meekly describing the project's original conception as a humanitarian sign. The claim provoked audible scoffs, but Klein pressed forward, trembling. "We believed foolishly that by augmenting strength and endurance we might reduce suffering, lessen toil, and extend life expectancy of the bondman." Committee members leaned forward, scenting contradiction. Under their questions, Klein faltered. Then the flood burst. He confessed that treatments had escalated from dietary tonics and regimented breeding into invasive manipulations, strange tinctures, surgeries, galvanic stimulation. He admitted that records now lost spoke of bones thickened to impossible density, ligaments reinforced beyond natural elasticity, minds sharpened even as bodies grotesquely enlarged. And then the name emerged into official record for the first time. Klein, sweating under oath, described him as the most successful and most dangerous subject. His strength, he claimed, measured at fourfold the baseline of common men. His intellectual faculties not only preserved but heightened. His spirit of defiance, Klein whispered, rendered him fundamentally unsuited for continued servitude. The chamber froze. The words amounted to admission. They had created not a tool but a rival. Reporters scrawled feverishly. Whispers surged through the gallery. The South's defenders fumed, demanding suppression. But the damage was done. The bone breaker of Little Rock now stood inscribed not merely in rumor, but in congressional transcript. The following day's testimony cut deeper still. Klein confessed that the program had expanded beyond enslaved stock. Prisoners, immigrants, even volunteer soldiers were drawn into its machinery, seldom informed of the risks. The line between bondage and science blurred into nightmare. What began as exploitation of the enslaved metastasized into a system of human experimentation without precedent. One committee member cried out, unable to restrain himself, "This is nothing less than a factory of monsters." Southern representatives countered with appeals to states' rights, insisting that oversight of agricultural science lay beyond federal reach. Yet the truth was plain. The enhancement scheme had swelled beyond plantation walls, touching military and medical institutions at the very heart of the Republic. The military connection emerged in closed session testimony by General Winfield Scott. Though redacted in public papers, fragments later surfaced in private correspondence. Scott admitted that since 1852 the War Department had funneled resources toward enhancement research, dreaming of soldiers who might march without rest, endure extremes, strike with superhuman force. But the dream rotted swiftly. Scott described volunteers who once altered, displayed insubordination, desertion, even mutiny. They grew resistant to command, he testified. They acted from judgment, not ours. Several carried intelligence into wilderness. They were not soldiers, they were sovereigns in themselves. By 1857 the military program was abandoned, but dozens of subjects remained unaccounted for. Thus by the end of April 1859, Congress faced the revelation of a scattered legion, men altered beyond comprehension, roaming unseen. At their head, if rumor spoke true, strode Elias the Bonebreaker, once slave now uncontainable. The hearings reached their climax on April 25th, when the committee received communication from Elias himself, delivered through intermediaries, abolitionists whose names remained sealed. The statement was read aloud into record. Silence filled the chamber as the words resounded. I write not as fugitive, nor as property, but as free. My chains are broken, not by purchase, nor by pardon, but by the marrow of my own being. Too long we have been subjects of commerce and experiment. We reject both. We demand the end of all such practices, the freedom of those held still in bondage, and recognition as human equal to any who call themselves citizen. He concluded with chilling certainty, if our demands are not met, we shall secure freedom by other means. The experiment is over. The specimens have become the scientists. The words struck like hammer upon glass, signed not by Elias alone but by 53 others. The message amounted to nothing less than declaration of independence from a new order of beings, altered, scattered, yet unite. Panic surged through southern ranks. Calls for immediate military pursuit rang out, demands for bounties and executions. Northern voices, though wary of the implications, whispered that justice demanded heed. The fracture widened. A nation already tilting towards civil war now trembled at the thought of enhanced insurrection. President Buchanan, pressed on all sides, authorized a federal task force to locate and neutralize the insurgents. Troops fanned across territories. Rewards were posted. Yet even as soldiers scoured forests, reports emerged of Elias's presence not in hiding but in the very heart of cities. Washington, Philadelphia, Charleston. Witnesses claimed to see a towering figure passing silently among crowds, eyes glinting with impossible calm, vanishing before pursuit could form. Then on May 15, 1859 came the event that seared itself into legend. Elias appeared openly in Washington, striding through streets as though no law applied to him. Accounts agree he stood of immense stature, shoulders broad enough to part crowds, stride like a man unburdened by fear. He walked directly to the Capitol step. Guards froze, unsure whether to raise arms or bow. He did not attack. He simply stood, denied audience by the committee. Elias turned and, with deliberate force, pressed his hand into the marble of the Capitol stair. Witnesses swear the stone yielded, groaning under his grip. Into that stone he carved the words, "The experiment is over," and beneath, "The specimens are the scientists." By dusk he was gone, vanished into city shadows, but the mark remained, gouged deep into marble, an enduring testimony that could not be denied. The so-called Samson crisis, as papers christened it, had reached its apex. No longer the tale of one fugitive. It now signified confrontation between an oppressed people transformed by science and the government that sought to erase them. Whether Elias was monster, liberator, or something beyond either, one truth became certain. The Republic could no longer claim ignorance of what it had wrought. The weeks following Elias's defiant appearance at the Capitol were consumed by fever. Newspapers across the Union blared headlines of the super slave in Washington. Pamphleteers exaggerated his stature until he became mythic. 12 feet tall, bulletproof, invincible. Sermons thundered from pulpits, some proclaiming him an avenging angel sent by God, others branding him Antichrist. Behind closed doors, however, the hysteria gave way to something colder, quieter, more treacherous. While the public raged, the government moved to broker an arrangement too terrible for daylight. On June 4, 1859, a secret delegation gathered in a subterranean chamber of the Treasury building. No record exists in official archives, but fragments survive in the private journals of Secretary Howell Cobb, and in the intercepted letters of Dr. Marcus Klein. From these pieces we reconstruct what has come to be known, half-whispered, rarely named, as the Washington Compact. The delegation numbered 9, 3 Southern planters of immense wealth, their estates swollen with slaves, 2 Northern industrialists with interests in chemical manufactories, a representative of the War Department, Secretary Cobb himself speaking for the President, and astonishingly, Elias, who entered not in chains but as equal negotiator. How they secured his attendance remains debated. Some claim emissaries from the abolitionist underground facilitated his passage. Others insist the War Department permitted it, hoping to entrap him. What is certain is that when he stepped into that chamber, the air chilled and the gathered men, though powerful in office and fortune, could not conceal their unease. He spoke first. Witnesses agree his voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of iron. "You cannot kill what you have made," Elias declared. "You cannot erase the knowledge already sown. I did not come to beg.
I came to decide whether you will treat us as men or face us as enemies. The words hung like smoke. Klein recorded in his journal that Cobb trembled visibly, yet compromise, not confrontation, defined the session. For all their bluster, the delegates recognized a reality. The altered subjects, numbering dozens, perhaps hundreds, were beyond their capacity to eliminate. The army had already failed. The alternative was accommodation. Thus unfolded the Washington Compact. Its articles, pieced together from scattered testimony, read more like covenant than treaty. Elias and his fellows would refrain from overt insurrection, halting their public appearances. In return, the federal government would cease active pursuit, suppressing military expeditions against them. Plantation masters involved in the enhancement protocols would surrender research to federal custody. Under strict surviving altered subjects would be accounted for quietly, some absorbed into remote labor projects, others dispersed beyond territorial borders. Above all, silence. Neither side would speak openly of what had transpired. The agreement was not signed with pen and ink, but with blood. Elias, so the record claims, pressed his thumb into a basin of lamb's blood, marking a parchment that Cobb himself then countersigned. When asked why such barbarous ritual was chosen, Klein recorded Elias's reply: because paper burns, blood remains. The compact, if indeed it existed as described, was never ratified nor debated. It lingered only in whispers, preserved through coded correspondence, but its effects were immediate and chilling. By July 1859, newspapers abruptly ceased their coverage of the bone break, where only months before his name filled every column. Now silence reigned. Reports of sightings vanished. Editors explained it as hysteria cooled, but survivors of the hearings knew better. The silence was deliberate. Meanwhile, plantations known to have participated in enhancement trials were quietly liquidated. Their ledgers disappeared into government vaults. Overseers who might testify either fled or met sudden suspicious death. The South muttered of federal overreach, yet none dared expose the truth lest they implicate themselves. Most chilling was the fate of the subjects themselves. Some were indeed deported. Accounts place groups of them shipped under false manifest to Liberia, others sent to hidden camps in Western territories, yet the numbers never added. Too many were unaccounted for. Elias himself vanished into obscurity, leaving only rumor of his presence, sometimes in New Orleans, sometimes in the mountains of Virginia, sometimes farther still, as though he existed in several places at once. What haunts the record most are the clinical notes Klein smuggled into his private archive. After the compact, he was tasked with cataloging the altered. His lists read like a surgeon's autopsy. Subject 17, abnormal ossification of rib cage, capable of resisting bayonet thrust. Subject 22, muscular hypertrophy, capable of lifting wagon axle unaided. Subject 31, cognitive acceleration, recites complex passages after single reading. Subject 46, violent psychosis, attempted to strangle examiner, terminated with difficulty. In margin notes, Klein recorded his despair. We have fashioned, not men of greater strength, but parodies of God's design. Each success contains a ruin, each improvement births deformity, yet they are still human, and therein lies the crime most unforgivable. Elias' demand echoed through every page. The specimens are the scientists. The line which had shocked Congress weeks earlier now took on darker resonance, for in their efforts to transcend natural limits, the experimenters themselves had been exposed as subjects, test cases in cruelty, blinded by ambition, stripped of humanity long before those they modified. The Washington Compact held, outwardly, public quiet return, but in silence the altered subjects moved like ghosts through the Republic, half myth, half threat. Their presence unsettled the nation at a moment already sliding toward civil war. A letter from abolitionist Theodore Parker to William Lloyd Garrison, dated August 1859, captures the dread. I tell you, brother, the South is haunted not merely by the specter of insurrection, but by creatures they have themselves wrought. They whisper that on moonless nights a figure passes across cotton fields, so tall his head brushes branches, so silent the hounds do not bark. If it is Elias, then he is the angel of judgment, but if it is not he, then it is some other, and we know not how many such others now walk the land. What neither Parker nor Garrison could guess was that the compact contained a hidden clause, never written, only spoken, that would bind the fates of Elias's kin and the Union itself. For Secretary Cobb, before sealing the meeting, leaned close to Elias and murmured, "The day will come when this Union splits. When it does, we may have need of your kind again. Until then, sleep or vanish. But remember, our silence purchases yours. It was not treat, it was bargain with nightmare, a contract of blood and secrecy, whose interest would be collected in years to come. By autumn 1859, as John Brown struck at Harper's Ferry and the nation slid toward conflagration, the compact ensured that one terror remained hidden beneath the larger storm. Yet in diaries, in rumors, in haunted stone where words remained carved, the memory endured. The experiment was not ended, it was merely waiting.
When the Washington Compact slid into effect, its outward aim was silence. Newspapers ceased mention of Elias. The public, distracted by the gathering storm of secession, was permitted to forget. Yet within the sealed corridors of government, the story did not end. In truth, it was only then that the archive began to swell with horrors too vast to publish. At the heart of this concealed machinery was Dr. Marcus Klein. Once a frightened witness before Congress, he was quietly absorbed back into service. No longer an outsider, but now custodian of a secret collection. He received instructions from the War Department to consolidate, catalog and refine every fragment of the enhancement project, to burn nothing, to preserve all. The compact had forbidden further creation of new subjects, but the archives, Cobb whispered, must endure in case of need. Thus Klein descended into a life of shadows. He took up residence in a secure annex beneath the old patent office in Washington, a place few dared enter. By day, clerks shuffled above, registering inventions of cotton gins and reaping machines. By night, in the echoing chambers below, Klein unrolled ledgers that documented not inventions but violations, recipes of tinctures, diagrams of marrow drills, bone density tables written in a surgeon's hand. The catalog that emerged is one of the most chilling documents in American medical history. Its folios, known to later archivists only as the Anatomica Obscura, classified each subject with merciless precision. Subject 5, female, age 17, tibia lengthened through mechanical extension. Result, gait impaired, eventual collapse of joints. Terminated. Subject 12, male, age 33, treated with galvanic currents across spinal cord, developed heightened reflex arc, capable of catching dropped musket ball in air. Later exhibited spasms that fractured vertebrae. Deceased. Subject 28, female, age 21, fed proprietary iron solution, bones hardened to unnatural degree, teeth enamel blackened, capable of crushing pestle in hand, mental faculties deteriorated, language reduced to monosyllables, alive, untraceable. Page after page bled with such entries, each a ledger of cruelty masked in the language of science. Klein recorded weights, measures, ratios. He timed feats of endurance with a watch. Yet beneath the precision, his notes betray a deepening terror. In margins he scrawled questions. What have we awakened? Is strength without measure still human? If mind endures while body mutates, what spirit inhabits the frame? He never received answers. From scattered memoranda we know Klein presented his findings in closed sessions to a select circle of officials. They listened, grim-faced, then instructed him to redact his language. No mention of humanity, one marginal note commands. Subjects must be treated as specimens, else the moralists will raise alarm. Thus, in official summaries, the altered were reduced to data, height, weight, tensile strength, their stories erased, but in Klein's private hand, their cries remain. He records Subject 19 weeping in German hymns, learned from mother. Subject 34 whispering prayers before each procedure. Subject 41 pleading, tell them I am still a man. Klein did not destroy these fragments. He hid them in the bindings of anatomy texts shelved in the Smithsonian's collection. They would not be discovered until decades later, when a restorer found loose leaves trembling like ghosts within leather covers. It was not only the catalog that haunted him. The War Department demanded ongoing trials, though not in Washington, where scrutiny threatened. Instead, they shipped specimens westward beyond the frontier, where oversight grew thin. There, in crude stockades along the Kansas plains, the experiments resumed in darker form. Reports filtered back. One officer described a man whose skin thickened into hide, impervious to rifle shot. Another told of a woman whose vision sharpened until she could track a hawk against sun. These accounts never reached newspapers. They sank into ciphered correspondence. But whispers persisted among settlers, of shadows moving across prairie too swift for horse, of guttural cries that froze cattle in their pens. Meanwhile, Klein grew desperate. His journal from November 1859 records, "They call me archivist, but I am undertaker. I bury their sins in paper and ink. Each specimen is a gravestone." He considered flight, even contemplated destroying the collection, yet he remained, bound by fear, for he knew silence bought survival. Then came the most disturbing revelation of all. The experiments had not only continued upon enslaved and imprisoned bodies, they had turned inward. Several specimens bore northern names. Irish and German immigrants promised wages for service, and worse, at least 3 were sons of senators, offered as volunteers for advancement. The pursuit of superiority had no allegiance to region. Both North and South thirsted for the perfected man. Thus the compact's hidden clause revealed itself. Elias and his kin were not the only altered. Others, scattered in ranks of privilege, now walked unnoticed through parlors and officers' tents. The boundary between oppressor and oppressed blurred, fused in grotesque symmetry. Klein's most chilling entry, dated March 1860, describes Subject 52, recorded only as cadet. This youth, trained at West Point, endured spinal reinforcement with steel rods. The surgery nearly killed him, yet he rose weeks later, able to march 20 miles without fatigue. His instructors marveled, unaware of the wires laced through his flesh. Klein notes, if he leads men into battle, they will follow not commander but machine. By spring of 1860, the archive had grown monstrous. Klein's folios filled shelf after shelf. The government, fearful of leaks, relocated the collection beneath the Capitol itself. There, among crypt-like chambers, the Anatomica Obscura lay sealed in iron cabinets. Guards stationed at the entrance reported strange noises, groans like wind, faint scratching, whispers in unknown tongues. Whether imagination or something more, no one dared linger. In his final surviving letter, Klein wrote to his estranged brother in Dresden, "We have traded the whip for scalpel, the auction block for dissecting table, yet the result is the same, men remade as beasts for profit. I fear one day they shall return, demanding account not from masters alone, but from all who were silent. If such day comes, pray you are far from this cursed republic." That letter, intercepted and never delivered, was later found among Cobb's personal papers after the war. Its ink, faded now, carries the weight of prophecy, for even as the nation inched towards secession, the shadow of the altered hung over every calculation. Soldiers might march, states might secede, but in hidden chambers beneath Washington lay records of another war entirely, one waged not for territory nor union, but for the soul of mankind. And still Elias remained unseen, yet never absent. Rumors swirled that he prowled the corridors of Klein's archive itself, unseen but felt. Clerks spoke of tall figures passing in torchlight, of footsteps that left no echo. Klein never confirmed these accounts, yet in one marginal note he scribbled, "He watches, he waits." What haunted Klein most, however, was not Elias's presence, but his absence. For if Elias still lived, free and unbound, what prevented him from returning to finish what had begun? And if Elias had perished, what then of the others, the dozens scattered, dispersed, concealed? Perhaps they were nearer than anyone guessed. Perhaps the experiment was not confined to past but to present, its fruit ripening still in secret. By the dawn of 1860, the archive had ceased to be mere record. It had become a monument to dread, a mausoleum of paper, ink, and whispered scream. Those who entered left pale, shaken, unwilling to speak. Yet the collection endured, waiting for hands that might one day unseal it. The compact had promised silence. Klein had delivered, but silence, like stone, may yet crack, and beneath that stone, the voices wait. The spring of 1860 was remembered by politicians for fiery speeches and secession threats, yet beneath the surface, a quieter reckoning stirred, one not inscribed in congressional record, but in the marrow of those who had survived the experiment. Elias emerged then, as if summoned by the nation's fracture, walking again into human memory after months of absence. The first reports came from Little Rock, though none bore his name. Witnesses described a figure of impossible height moving through forests by moonlight, cattle found with ribs broken as though by great hand. A boy claimed he saw a man stride across the Arkansas River without pause, water splitting at his shins. Whether truth or fevered tale, all agreed, the bone breaker had returned. Yet Elias no longer appeared alone. Wherever his shadow fell, others followed. They were quieter than he, less colossal, but altered still. One with shoulders hunched by unnatural bone, another whose eyes gleamed yellow in firelight, another whose breath rattled like forge bellows. Together they formed not army but congregation, bound not by chains, nor by overseers, but by their shared unmaking. News of these gatherings reached Washington, carried by nervous planters and trembling sheriff. The War Department dismissed them as rumor,
until one night in June when an entire work gang vanished from a plantation outside Pine Bluff. Their cabins lay abandoned, food still steaming on the table, no footprints save one. Impressions sunk so deep into clay that soil cracked like pottery around them. Klein shone the plaster casts, recognized the size at once. Elias had taken them. The government panicked. Orders were drawn for militia patrols, though most men quailed at the thought of confronting beings whispered to be impervious to ball and blade. Some Southern legislators clamored for bounty hunters, others demanded more science, more enhancements of their own soldiers. Northern abolitionists, meanwhile, whispered that Elias was no monster but redeemer, that he gathered the broken into a secret exodus, leading them towards some sanctuary beyond human cruelty. Klein alone grasped the deeper terror, that Elias was not freeing merely bodies, but awakening minds. In his journal he recorded intercepted testimony from a captured subject, a woman whose ribs had fused into cage-like armor. She declared, "He tells us we are more than men, that the marrow of empire is rotted, and we must crack it open." By midsummer, Elias's congregation had swelled. No census marked their number, but trails of escape grew bolder. Plantations reported vanished workers in Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana. In Tennessee, a caravan of wagons was stopped on suspicion of carrying fugitives. Inside, soldiers found only bones, each fractured clean across, piled like cordwood. None could explain how. The climax arrived on an August night outside Helena, Arkansas. There on the bluffs above the river, witnesses reported a convocation. Scores of figures gathered in torchlight, their shapes grotesque yet solemn. Farmers who glimpsed it from afar spoke of chanting not in any tongue they knew, but in rhythms that shook the earth itself. At the center stood Elias, taller than all, his hands raised skyward. Some swore lightning answered him, striking river water without storm. What occurred that night has never been fully recorded. Some claimed the congregation swore an oath, others that they performed a rite of blood. Klein, reviewing later fragments, wrote only, "The altered now perceived themselves not as victims but as nation." The morning after, Helena awoke to silence. Entire quarters of enslaved men and women had emptied, leaving huts deserted, doors swinging in breeze. A single phrase was found scratched into a barn wall: "The chains are bones and bones break." Panic spread faster than rumor. Southern presses demanded war upon the altered. Northern editors, more cautious, counseled restraint, fearing to inflame abolitionist fervor. Yet neither side could ignore the truth. Elias had become more than fugitive. He was leader of a people without name, a nation hidden yet growing. Klein himself was summoned to Washington, ordered to provide counsel. Before senators he unrolled his catalogue, pointing to entries long buried in iron cabinets. "They are not merely escaped slaves," he testified. "They are products of our own manufacture, forced beyond humanity by our hand. If they rise, we have armed our enemies with power no regiment can quell." The chamber sat in cold silence. None dared record his words in official minutes. Instead, the session adjourned under oath of secrecy, each man departing pale. Outside the Capitol that evening, Klein walked alone. He later wrote in his journal, "I saw Elias at dusk, standing across the square. He did not approach, he did not speak, yet I felt his gaze pierce me, as needle through flesh. He knows what I have written, he knows I am witness." Within weeks, Elias's congregation vanished again into wilderness, leaving behind only broken chains, shattered manacles, and rumors of a march westward. Some believed they sought the mountains, others whispered of a northern haven beyond reach of law. Klein feared they moved towards something more dreadful, reunion with the scattered subjects hidden by the government itself. If altered joined altered, their strength would magnify beyond measure. It was then that Klein began to dream, not idle fancies, but visions so vivid they bled into wake. He dreamt of Elias seated upon throne of bones, his hands resting not in fists but in blessing. Around him knelt figures unrecognizable as wholly human, yet radiating devotion. Klein awoke each time drenched in sweat, heart hammering with terror not of violence but of reverence. For in those dreams, Elias was no longer fugitive, he was king. The government, desperate to contain the crisis, escalated its measures. Orders were given to seize suspected altered wherever found. Whole families were dragged from cabins, their bones examined for signs of reinforcement. Some were hanged simply for being too tall, too strong, too silent. Yet the more they hunted, the more Elias seemed to grow. Each execution became fuel, each act of cruelty a summons to his cause. By winter of 1860, whispers claimed Elias had crossed the Mississippi with hundreds at his back. Others swore he walked still in Arkansas, appearing and vanishing like apparition. None could confirm, yet everywhere his legend spread, and with it, dread. It was clear to Klein and to a few frightened officials that the crisis had entered a new phase. Elias was no longer specimen, no longer symbol of revolt alone. He was something larger, proof that the marrow of human ambition, once fractured, could never be restored. And so Part 8 closes with a truth whispered only in Klein's final surviving note, dated December 20th, 1860, the day South Carolina seceded. This nation tears itself in two, yet beneath that wound festers a deeper fracture, wrought not by politics but by bone. Elias walks still, and where he walks the future follows.
The new year dawned with the Union collapsing in fragments. Newspapers declared secession, militias drilled in town squares, and men spoke openly of war, yet in letters sealed with black wax. Another subject consumed the private councils of government. Elias and the Altline's name appeared on every memorandum. He had become the reluctant oracle of this secret calamity, summoned not for his loyalty but for his knowledge. In January 1861 he was conducted under guard to a basement chamber of the Capitol, where a special committee convened without record. Candles guttered on the table as senators and generals leaned forward to hear his report. Klein unrolled his folios, maps, sketches, fragments of testimony. His voice trembled as he spoke. They are not dispersed. They are not fleeing. They are gathering. Every disappearance across the South is not chaos but order. Elias leads them. He summons the broken as though by unseen cord, and they come. One senator scoffed until Klein produced sketches taken from a captured courier. They depicted not random flight, but paths converging westward, from Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, even Kentucky. Routes bent toward the Ozark highlands. A red X marked the point of union. General Scott demanded explanation. Klein could only murmur. He seeks reunion with all subjects, wherever hidden. He means to assemble them, an army of the altar. The room fell silent. Men who had spoken bravely of secession now stared as if glimpsing specter. One finally whispered, "And when he has them?" Klein's reply chilled the air. "Then the experiment will no longer belong to us. It will belong to them." The following weeks confirmed his fears. Reports from frontier forts spoke of strange gatherings in the forests, campfires seen from ridges, livestock slaughtered with bones broken clean, marrow sucked as though by ritual. Soldiers sent to investigate seldom returned. Those who did came back trembling, muttering of shadows that moved without sound. One patrol near Fayetteville reported encountering a figure of immense size who stepped from the trees and spoke in measured voice. "This land belongs to none but God, and the broken depart." They fired upon him. Their bullets flattened against his chest like seeds against stone. Only 2 men lived to recount it. Panic spread through military ranks, yet the government could not admit its terror. To the public they spoke only of secession. In secret they convened again, debating desperate measures, firebombing the Ozarks, poisoning rivers, unleashing pestilence. All plans faltered upon the same truth. No one knew how many Elias commanded, nor where they truly lay. Klein meanwhile was sinking. His journals from February reveal a man unraveling. "I no longer trust the boundary between waking and dream. Last night I saw them, gathered in cavern vast as cathedral. Their bodies gleamed with sweat, their bones shining through flesh like lanterns beneath skin. And Elias upon the altar of stone spoke not of vengeance but of judgment. His words echoed in my skull, 'We are the marrow of your sin.'" He began to suspect that Elias could reach him across distance, threading thought through blood. In one entry he writes, "He knows when I write. I feel his gaze upon the page." By March the first open confrontation occurred. A company of militia, 300 strong, marched into the Ozark foothills with orders to seize the altered. They vanished. Weeks later their muskets were found stacked neatly in a clearing, barrels twisted into knots. Nearby trees bore carvings of human hands, impressions pressed into bark as if it were clay. Word of this disaster leaked. Whispers spread through taverns and parlors, of giants in the hills, of an uprising more terrible than secession itself. Some dismissed them as tale, others shuddered in silence, sensing truth behind the whispers. Then in April, on the very day that guns roared at Fort Sumter, another message appeared in Washington. It was not carried by courier, nor signed by senator. It was found carved into the marble step of the Capitol at dawn. "We are gathered, we are one." The letters were deep gouges, cut not with chisel but with hands. Guards swore no intruder had passed. The stone still flaked dust when touched. Panic gripped the secret committee. The coincidence of dates could not be ignored. The nation split in civil war above ground, and beneath, a fracture more dreadful widened. If they strike now, whispered one official, we shall have war on two fronts, against neighbor and against creation itself. Klein begged them to consider negotiation. He argued that Elias was not mad but purposeful, that he might be reached. He does not seek slaughter for its own sake, Klein insisted. He seeks recognition, proof that he and his kin are men, not specimens. The general scoffed. One barked, men do not crush regiments with bare hands. But another, older senator, stared long into the candlelight and murmured, perhaps monsters are only men we refuse to see. The debate ended unresolved. Soldiers marched to war against secession, leaving Elias unchallenged. Perhaps it was mercy, perhaps it was cowardice. What we know next comes from fragments, not official record. In May 1861, a trader passing through the Ozarks stumbled upon a valley lit by hundreds of fires. He swore he saw a multitude gathered, men and women of every hue, their bodies warped yet radiant. At their center, a colossal figure lifted both arms as if in benediction. The trader fled, but his description reached Washington through whispers. Klein, upon hearing, collapsed into tears. It is done, he wrote. They are no longer scattered. They are nation. He never again appeared before committee. His last journal entry, dated June, reads, I have felt him near, not in dream, not in rumor, but here, in this room. He speaks without voice. We do not rise against you, we rise beyond you. If this is true, then mankind has birthed not rebels, not slaves but inheritors, and we stand at the twilight of our dominion. There the record breaks. Klein vanished weeks later, his chambers found empty, his folios scattered as though by storm. Some claimed he fled, others whispered Elias had come for him, claiming witness for the congregation. His fate remains unknown. The war that split the Union consumed all record. Battles filled the papers, casualty lists stretched columns long, and cannon thundered from Virginia to Vicksburg. Yet beneath the clamor, another story moved in silence. The congregation of Elias gathered, hidden, watching. They did not march on capitals. They did not storm plantations. Instead, they vanished deeper into wilderness, as though content to let the nation destroy itself. Yet traces remained for those who looked. In Missouri, scouts stumbled upon a clearing, where tree trunks were bent into arches, forming a vault-like cathedral nave. Bones littered the floor, not slain soldiers but cattle arranged with reverence, each vertebra aligned like rosary. In northern Arkansas, refugees fleeing Union advance claimed they were guided through mountain passes by immense figures, who vanished before dawn. They said nothing, one woman recalled, but their silence was mercy. In Tennessee, a Union officer recorded finding an abandoned Confederate camp, every musket bent, every sword snapped, not in rage but in demonstration, as if to say, we could have killed you but did not. Still fear not. Rumors reached generals on both sides. Elias waited, patient, until war weakened the nation enough for him to inherit its ruins. Others whispered he had already departed, leading his congregation into lands beyond reach of men, where no flag would ever fly again. Klein's absence became its own legend. Some swore they saw him walking among the altered, his once feeble frame now straightened, his eyes bright with devotion. Others believed he died nameless in some hospital ward, raving of bones until his last breath. No grave bears his name. After Appomattox, when soldiers returned home, and the nation licked its wounds, investigators again sought Elias. They found nothing but echoes. Caverns stood empty, their walls scarred with handprints pressed into stone. Valleys lay deserted, save for campfire. Trails ended at rivers where prints disappeared midstream. It was as though an entire people had chosen erasure. The government buried the matter in silence. Records were sealed, testimonies struck from archives. New administrations had no appetite for tales of giants, of broken-bone congregations haunting the hills. Reconstruction demanded order, not whispers of altered humanity lurking beyond reach. And so officials declared Elias a myth, a ghost, born of slave panic, and consigned his story to oblivion. Yet the silence was too neat. From time to time, fragments surfaced. A Union veteran in 1872 swore he was carried from battlefield by colossal hands, laid gently in shade, and when he awoke his shattered ribs were set straighter than before. A prospector in the Ozarks found a cavern lined with bones stacked like bricks, each bearing fracture marks precise as surgeon's cuts. A missionary traveling west wrote in his journal of meeting a tall man, whose gaze shook my soul, and who asked only one question: do you believe men are bound to marrow, or can marrow be made new? These accounts were dismissed,
forgotten, but they echo still. What truth can be salvaged? We know Elias lived, born enslaved, remade by hands that sought to weaponize his body. We know he broke his master's neck one Thanksgiving, and we know he vanished into wilderness, gathered others altered by the same experiments, and led them in silence beyond the reach of government. What we cannot know is what they became. Did they found hidden nation in the mountains, a people apart? Did they dwindle, their altered bodies failing under weight of unnatural design? Or do they walk still, unseen yet near, awaiting some future fracture in our order? Klein's last words haunt most of all. We do not rise against you, we rise beyond you. If true, then Elias did not intend conquest, but transcendence, leaving mankind behind as one leaves behind broken shell. And yet, on autumn nights when the wind moans through trees and bones ache with weather, some in Arkansas still whisper of a figure crossing fields, taller than any man, his stride silent, his shadow bending the grass. They call him the bone breaker. They say he does not kill now, unless provoked. They say his eyes are calm, almost sorrowful, as if watching from another age. Perhaps he waits, perhaps he remembers, perhaps Marrow does not forget. This concludes the account. Officially, Elias never existed. Officially, there was no congregation, no altered, no fracture in the marrow of a nation already cracking from war. Officially, the bones were buried, but the bones break still, and sometimes in silence, something listens.